Olivia, thank you for that live report. The ongoing debt ceiling debate continues as negotiators try to strike a budget deal to avert an economic crisis. Western Mass News reporter Kristen Burnell getting answers from Congressman Richard Neal on how this may impact you if the deal isn't made.
Negotiations continued on Friday at Capitol Hill over the United States debt limit.
Negotiations are ongoing. The president, as you know, has cut short his trip to Japan. He's coming back for what we hope will be the final stages of the agreement.
Western Mass News brought questions to Congressman Richard Neal about the debt ceiling debate.
The parties the negotiators apparently are continuing to meet. Optimistic that we will find some sort of an agreement, but I also think that there are those who would prefer to embrace the conflict of it rather than the solution.
The debt ceiling or limit sets the maximum amount of outstanding federal debt the United States government can incur. One local economics professor tells us the United States has a limit of $31.4 trillion, which was reached earlier this year. He says negotiators have to decide whether to cut spending back or raise the debt limit by June 1st. If that limit is increased, the government can spend money on things that are important to most people, such as Social Security checks, various welfare payments, and military funds. And with talks in Congress expected to continue through the weekend, Congressman Neal says if a deal is not reached, there will be an impact to people locally.
There will be if the debt ceiling is not honored, and I think that it's beyond comprehension that we would violate America's obligations not only to our citizenry but to the world. American currency is clearly the most important currency in the world, and compromising it would be a huge step backward for Americans' credibility.
Reporting for Western Mass News, I'm Kristen Burnell.